Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the beginner's guide. There is a danger, certainly, as we're now at chapter 7, that the promises of all of this backstory and looking at all of these bad games are going to all culminate into something important and an important message that we should hear. But I wonder if there isn't a real danger here that the message is going to be fairly boring and unimportant to me personally. If this turns into something like always drink your Ovaltine, to quote that horrible movie The Christmas Story, that would be a huge disappointment. I'm not even really expecting anything from the visuals and the games that they're going to show me. It would be somewhat surprising, I suppose, if they did show me more of interesting. So now we have different prompts, different people. Like, I'm not even expecting anything from these actual games, so it would be shocking if they did give me actual, like, good gameplay. Alright, let's go with yes. Well, let's hit 3 first as an option. That does nothing. Yes, do you want to solve it? No, we actually find the black space between the doors to be far more interesting. Have you seen it? Why would I care about the space between the doors? Actually, now that you mention it, I remember a strange feeling as I passed through it. I don't recall a space between the doors. Interesting that they're asking more about the space in between the doors. Although in a lot of ways this is just being artsy-fartsy again, or at least it feels like it is. I'm gonna go with 1. Why would I care about the space between doors? There is a reason, but it may take time before you understand, which is fine. You'll see it again soon. And see, the chifforobe disappeared, and then we have a door. We just keep going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole.
And so we make one last descent down to the final floor of the level.
So it's a very long experience compared to the previous demos / games. This almost feels like what Alice in Wonderland would have been if Alice in Wonderland was bad. If it was a bad book, a short book, if it was stealing ideas and still trying to have the same themes and concepts. And then you almost would assume that this is just going to start you back where you started. No, interestingly, it didn't. It put you in what kind of looks like
Okay, I can't tell you quite why, but for some reason, Coda fixates on this lamppost. It's going to appear at the end of every single one of his games from here on out. I'll tell you what I think. I think that up to this point, he's been making really strange and abstract games with no clear purpose, and maybe you can only float around in that headspace for so long. Because now he wants something to hold on to. He wants a reference point. He wants the work to be leading to something. He wants a destination, which is what this lamppost is. It's a destination. We're going to see it in the work as well. His games are just going to become a lot more cohesive, a lot more fully developed, with more of a clear idea behind them. And as we go, that idea will get clearer and clearer and clearer.
There's a lamppost in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Certainly, that might be the reference, but this game is connected to the internet. As you walk around, you can leave notes. All the notes that you see are left by other players. I don't believe that to be true. It definitely feels like at this point you're stealing concepts from like Dark Souls. Still potentially using the source engine. Seems like he never broke himself, or Coda never broke himself away from using the source engine. Which is an interesting question. Was the Stanley Parable programmed originally in the source engine? Potentially yes. I'd say probably no. There could have been an early version of the Stanley Parable on the source engine. 2009 does feel like Dark Souls or Demon Souls would have already been out by that point, and it wouldn't be probably even the first time people could leave messages in a game. Nice room, not. So it just pops up when you walk near it. And it's the same thing every time you walk through it.
So first off, I'm sure you can deduce this, but this game is not connected to the internet. All of the notes that you're going to see have been written by Coda. This was actually the first game of his that I ever played. This was shortly after I met him at a weekend game jam in Sacramento, where I grew up. I saw him working on this very level, and it was just so different from anything that anyone else was doing. So right away I was like, I have to be friends with this person. In retrospect, I think I was probably a bit too pushy, trying to get his attention. I was over-enthusiastic. But he was very gracious about it and very patient with me. And I cooled off eventually.
Interesting. I wonder if that's a hint of the way the relationship goes. Yeah. It would make more sense if all of the games up until this point are literally game jam games. It would explain the inconsistency in the focus and the polish and the lack of real intent or desire to make a finished product. Arguably, I don't know if I believe game jams are actually helpful for programmers, or if it isn't really just an excuse for people to hang out and make relationships, which probably would help you in a career a little bit more. But I can't help but think that passion projects worked on a longer time frame than a couple of days.
Feel free to skip over any of these notes if they're not doing anything for you. Nothing extra is going to happen if you read all of them. Either way, to me they convey a sense of loneliness. I see this person who's filled with thoughts and feelings and beliefs and has no way to express them except as scattered and unheard voices in a game that wasn't meant to be played. But it's ironic, isn't it, that in playing this game and seeing how alone Coda often felt, that we get to know him better and actually kind of connect with him. And I have to be honest with you, this idea is really seductive to me. That I could just play someone's game and see the voices in their head and get to know them better and have to do less of the messy in-person socializing. I could just get to know you through your work. I think this is why I always liked Coda's games so much, is because it felt like they let me have that connection. I felt as though he was inviting me personally into his world. And then I feel less lonely too.
Yeah, I'm not really seeing anything in these notes. At a certain point, you could probably do pretty well as an antisocial programmer, but not so much as a completely autistic, locked-in programmer. You're gonna have to interact with some people to some level. If this Coda person really exists in these real games, it definitely screams of somebody who doesn't have a firm enough grasp on the touchstones of reality, and effectively they are making something that is much closer to the LSD inspired art of the 70s and 80s, where reality has just become very, very tangential to what you're perceiving and what you're interacting with. Because if you had more touchstones towards what would be expected in a video game or what would be expected in the real world, you just wouldn't be repeating the same textures over and over again and not having any interaction or actual gameplay. If anything, compared to the very first game we saw with the gun in the spaceship, this is a world that has no evidence of any humans really existing at all. Even the notes here, since we know they're all programmed by Coda, are screaming of being alone and now interacting with humans. And there is just weird text overlay options and functions here that are not better than the last time we saw Coda use that kind of programming. I have to assume that a lot of these are fake messages, but maybe not. We may very well end up going through all of this. This is way more text, though. And at a certain point, I wonder if this isn't just an angry reaction to people complaining about his previous games not really having enough text, or an experiment in having more text since his last game did have text in it. I don't know if all the games aren't at some level an emotional reaction to something or towards criticism of his previous games. This may be Coda, whoever Coda really is, may just be incapable of taking criticism. Yeah. But also, a lot of these games were implied to never have been released in the first place, so if they are angry emotional reactions, they're angry emotional reactions probably not to criticism of his game, but to his own potential self-criticism or towards some other thing happening in Coda's life. And that this is some form of only slightly healthy escapism. Definitely doesn't feel like there's take my hand, let's jump together. Can't jump off the edge. What's interesting here, it says stop, turn back, the proceeding further will only result in misery. At a certain point, I guess the question comes down to, do you or would someone continue to create if they're miserable just because they had no other better idea? And I imagine the case is true. Of course, if you're going to tell me a story of misery, you really only have to tell me the tale of most game developers getting into the video game industry and then being pushed and forced into massive amounts of overworking themselves, also known as crunch, and losing their minds through stress and overwork. on top of potentially losing their minds through being preached at by their coworkers to think and act and believe the same way as their coworkers do in a lot of different ways. Making a video game can very easily turn into, or working in a video game company can very easily turn away from just doing programming and into doing programming and playing politics inside and outside of the work, and desperately pretending like your coworkers are going to be your friends because you don't have any free time to make any outside friends, and there's a decent chance you didn't ever have outside friends in the first place. We're getting slightly different audio as we get here. We're seeing Devil Tower Star a couple of times. Cabbage Shapes Our Nation a couple of times. Art. But I guess the question really comes down to, is this story going to say that Coda ever even entered the game industry? Because we still are not really seeing games that would ever be sellable, or even something that you'd bother to put out for mass consumption. If anything, it becomes this secret collection of programming games. It almost makes it feel like Coda might be, instead of the autistic or antisocial shut-in that he's described as exclusively, or that I'm thinking he is, it almost feels like he might be a failed game developer who is teaching how to make games in some college, some low-level college, and he has how to program video games when even he doesn't really know, and he's probably teaching the wrong things from decades previous. I definitely have had some programming classes myself that were based around old ways of doing things and not anywhere close to what would be the industry standard of the time that I was taking those classes. If you were a college teacher and you were showing off these as demos and examples of what assignments should be, that puts you in a very safe position, because the students can ridicule you behind your back, but they wouldn't dare do it in front of your face, otherwise you'd kick them out of your class. And it would also explain kind of a lack of improvement. There is another scenario. Instead of being a teacher, though, you could also have been someone who gained a significant amount of success with one successful game that's just not being shown here, and then we are being shown all the other games that were failures and never shown. And then if that was, say, the creator of the Stanley Parable became super successful and well known for that one game, then he might get promoted to a point of incompetence, or at least to a point of inconvenience where he is a CEO or game director or producer and no longer capable of making games or showing off any actual games because he's just doing other work. And that is a believable narrative, more than this Coda narrative that we're being told here. If it was that Coda is actually the programmer of the Stanley Parable, and this is the story of the writer of the Stanley Parable talking about the programmer of the Stanley Parable effectively going crazy. And maybe the idea that somebody stole the game idea from somebody and that this game is a confession is something that I picked up externally.
At the end of this
not even
level, we're
right.
going to see the puzzle again. And here, I'll tell you what I think the puzzle means. Each of these games represents an idea that was on Coda's mind at the time that he was making it. And the puzzle is a way of closing the door on a previous chapter of his life before moving on to the next one.
I don't think I possibly hit all of the branches that we saw in the cavern.
In each of his games, after exploring a theme that, he might find difficult, Coda can then place this puzzle that he knows has a reliable solution, he understands exactly how it works, and so it gives him a simple mechanism for moving on.
Here you can hear whispering. So is that potentially an indication that Coda has obsessive, intrusive thoughts and concepts? Or is it an idea that in each of these games he's exploring a single theme or idea that would have just been a simple thought that you would have had and then passed on, and instead you potentially would have spent weeks, if not months, if not potentially years making a game to deal with that one thought, to just have the door at the end? That's not much of a coping mechanism, I would say.
And because there's this dark area between the doors, a space between spaces, before you move on, you get to pause. Just for a moment, a few seconds to reflect on and let go of the events that led you here. To step back and connect the pieces together. To grasp at that elusive bigger picture.
Yeah, honestly, I think taking even that much meaning from it is stupid. I think you're really grasping at straws to find meaning on something here that really shouldn't find meaning. Even if it was really meaningful and important to Coda, the lack of communication skills and the lack of bringing the player along to understand what it means is a problem. It definitely is something that I don't think should be rewarded. Alright. So yeah, once you get past that point, you cannot... Well, maybe you can. Nope, there's no handle on this side, so you're just trapped. And the voices in the head and the typewriting now definitely feels like it is an indication of somebody who's not mentally healthy. And then we have a bunch of typewriters. Are you there? Please say something. It can be anything. I just need you to say something. Talk to me, please. Why are you having so much difficulty talking? Speak, 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 speak. Porn stars die
okay,
too.
This one is tough. It's gonna kind of just spin its own wheels for a few minutes. Hang with it.
I'll take a moment to drink some water. We're seeing new assets here, so a slight improvement. I guess the question really comes down to whether or not this is a source engine game still, because if you told me this is finally moving to something like Unreal, I'd be willing to believe that. But you seem to often start with these experiments and doing something normal, and then you very quickly want to get away from the normality, want to get underground, want to get in dark narrow corridors. And if that's just because it's a Source Engine game, that's just more evidence to stop making Source Engine games. You have much nicer textures, much nicer lighting happening now, but it does seem to still want to just get to gray dark corridors. And we're now at the bottom of the well.
This is it, the whole game, and there's nothing that's particularly interesting about it. You just walk to the end of a hallway. Except, for some reason, Coda gets really fixated on this prison that has all of this modern furniture. And I don't know why, but he decides he needs to revisit this prison. He's gonna start over, use the same assets, turn it into something else. Okay, cool. Here's version 2.
Is it a prison? What furniture ought to go in the center of this room? How about a TV with surround sound, a refrigerator, put a giant hole in the ground. Interesting. Well, let's go with a refrigerator. I didn't see a refrigerator before. It ignores you. Okay, now what about along the wall of the... That was not a refrigerator. Huge picture of a horse. Tin stoves lined up against the wall. I'd really like a washing machine. We'll go with the washing machine. So he's just ignoring you, which in a prison, I imagine. Let's see. Tesla coils in each corner. We'll go with that. And a table, you need a table. Who are you? Where exactly are you doing this from? I'm pretty sure none of my choices make any difference. Tables were invented in 1935. Yeah, again, this really just feels like a game and a game creator who's just making garbage for the lulz more than anything else. It's really hard to see that there's a deeper thought around this. Even the narrator is saying, for some reason this person is getting obsessed with this. He's said that the Coda has gotten obsessed with many things, which maybe screams that Coda really is just obsessive, or maybe it just screams that the narrator totally misunderstands what the goal here was. The goal very possibly could have been for Coda to just waste time. Waste the player's time, waste his own time, get through school, get through college, get through life. I don't really feel like there's an odd, abstract art message here. It's very difficult for a lot of people to, me included, to get the meaning behind abstract art anyways, but often I think people have no meaning and they claim it's abstract art. So I picked answer number 1 there.
There's a bit more to this one, but still it's not really communicating anything. It's kind of just weird for weirdness' sake.
Even the narrator is agreeing with that one.
So okay, he throws it out and starts over. This time he comes at the prison idea from a different direction.
Hello, please walk forward. Seems like we have no choice but to walk forward. And see, this feels a lot like the Stanley Parable or the beginnings. This guide will enable you to escape any prison environment. Follow the instructions carefully. Take care that you remember each step. First, click on this table. Go ahead, go over to the photo frame and click to turn it slightly, which I assume is this. Here we see the 3 holes again. Now, turn the floor lamp in the room off and turn it back on. Now go to the left side sofa and move it over a little. Finally touch the shells. That's it. In a real prison, the escape will now open. Return to start to be taken back to your prison. Yeah. Still can't do anything with these holes. Yeah, it definitely feels to me like this is an attempt. It's getting darker. To pretend to have a lot more meaning than you really do. And that this might be an indication of what the beginnings of the ideas of the Stanley Parable were, as far as programming a game
and
or
of course,
writing the game.
Now the table is gone and you can't begin the chain of events to escape. Here's a version where there are no bars, but you can't actually get to the well. And then a version where the inside of the prison is the outside and the outside is the inside. Let me just blink you real quick through a few more of these. I mean, he really unloaded on this prison idea. There's nearly a dozen. Personally, I think it's awful to watch this, to see a person basically unraveling through their work. And for what? Like, at what point do you just go, maybe there are game ideas other than this prison that I could be working on? But Coda doesn't have that voice telling you to stop, that particular mechanism of defense against yourself. Without it, you just spiral. And so he keeps going and going and going and going and going, and then he hits on something. And he likes it. And that's it. He's done. He stops making prisons. This is the very last version of the prison game that he created. And the reason I think it works is that the prison is not actually in it.
Very dark. Can't see much of anything. And then you're walking to the lighthouse. Like, inherently, if you were to take a lot of what we're being shown literally, you would expect that he is imprisoned and being abused and locked into a house. Or maybe rightfully being locked into a house, because he does sound also very crazy. Crazier than probably is reasonable. And outside of that house, he can see this lamppost. And that's pretty much his only escape. If that was the case, though, then how did he go to a game jam? I mean, I suppose it's possible somebody would be allowed to, under supervision, to go to a game jam. I don't even know why you would describe this as the prison game, unless it's just labeled as a prison game. Then you have a whole new thing. Hello? Who is this? Hi, it's me. I'm you from after you escaped the prison. Interesting. You're me. So you were trapped in this prison too? Yep, it was in the furniture maze.
Conversation. And so this is what Coda wants, is to be able to talk to someone, to share what's on his mind, and to get some good advice from someone who knows. But the irony is that even in this scenario, you're still talking to yourself. You know, all of these games so far are Coda talking to himself.
Let's go with number 1 here. Inherently, this kind of hits a little home. As a YouTube content creator, a lot of my videos don't get a lot of views or comments, so I am effectively shouting into a void or just talking to myself when I'm criticizing games. It's not 100% of that. I do live streams and people get into chat on live streams every now and then, so I do know I'm getting some views, and quite a lot, frankly. Not enough subscribers as I would like, or views as I would ever like, certainly, but yeah, I could see being very isolated, particularly when you have kind of a specialized skill, arguably being a critic like I am. isn't really much of a skill to be happy about having, because nobody likes critics, particularly creators. Whereas being a creator and actually making something instead of just criticizing others is way better. But if you have a specialized skill such as making video games, it's hard to find a community there. And looking at the qualities of these games, it would be kind of hard to find the right community even in this case, because you're definitely not going to fit in with the professionals if they even had time for you, which they won't. And you're not going to quite fit in with probably the teenagers that are doing teenage products, because I imagine Coda, at this rate, looking at the timeline, is fairly old. If he had gone to a college, he might have found some community there, but I'm not sure he really did. As far as the choice here, we'll just pick one. And then where am I right now? Oh, I'm so glad to know that I get out eventually. What's it like to escape? Actually, I've already forgotten what being in prison was like. It's strange, but in a way, I'm kind of miss being in prison. It feels like being completely still and wildly in motion at the same time. Let's just go with 3. I'm not going to even put any thought into these answers. Do you feel any different? Sometimes I'm scared I'll get out and then things will be exactly the same as before. No, I'm really the same person now as I was back then. It actually does change. I don't feel like the same person at all, as far as your options are. The prison, more likely, is not a literal prison. If anything about Coda that's being said is true, the prison almost certainly is a mental prison of some sort, of obsessive, compulsive thoughts, depression, things like that. Oh, good. That's so nice to hear. That makes me feel really happy. Age just kind of does that, you know. I'm still me, but not somehow. It's hard to describe. Remember to enjoy being who you are right now. It won't last. We'll go with 3. Wait, if you're me, then did you just get a call from another version of you when you were trapped? No, I think I'm the first person to call back. Let's go with that one. Then can you tell me how to get out? Maybe I can come find you. What do I have to do? To get out, all you have to do is be sincere. To get out, you need to tell me how you feel right now. To get out, just talk with me for a bit. Let's go for feelings, if that's what we're looking for. What? That will free me? How does that work? Listen, you can't know until you're out, but I promise it works. Just tell me how you feel. It will make sense. Let's go with 2. Oh, I feel afraid that nothing will ever change. Okay, I'll go on.
I can see why he considers this a fitting conclusion to the prison games. After all of the obsession and frustration, just to be told by someone you can trust that things are going to be okay. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be nice, certainly,
so
but...
what would it look like if Coda wanted to make a game about talking to someone other than himself?
I'm not sure if Coda even knows what other people are. On some level. He's so deep into his own reality, as it were, and that would explain why none of these games came out. Which at a certain level, if the narrator is actually Coda, this is the narrator saying, this is who I used to be, and I imagine some of it, if not most of it, is true, but also, if the narrator, the creator of the writer of the Stanley Parable, is Coda, I can't feel like he just busted himself out of what is obviously a very long-term psychotic depressive episode. It almost seems like it's starting to slightly make more sense that Coda is a separate person, but I am still putting very little faith in that actually being the outcome. Yeah, and we are now at chapter 10, and at the beginning I said I was warned off of this game being sad, and there is a certain level of sadness to this if you can empathize with Coda, if you believe Coda to be a real person. Perhaps, though, that is a mistake, because in the same way, if you empathized with Stanley from the Stanley Parable, then you're just putting too much emotional baggage and weight on a fictional character. The biggest twist here, if I was telling the story, would be to say there is no Coda. None of these games were ever made before. This entire story is false. What the purpose here was to show that you shouldn't just become emotionally attached to fiction and give it the weight of reality. People playing video games or people in any other ways engaging with fiction always need to remind themselves that the characters in fiction are fictional, and not get too entwined into the fantasy of it all. Otherwise, you will have the kid who thinks he can fly like Harry Potter jumping off a roof, breaking his arm, and similar tales of similar types of things happening. And that has happened. I don't know if that exact incident has happened, but yeah. Kids in particular are particularly susceptible, and mentally unstable people are particularly susceptible to believing fiction. As a fan of anime, or at least a former fan of anime, I haven't watched a lot of it in probably over a decade, you definitely cannot get into the high amounts of potential drama and violence that you would see in the fictional stories that anime tells you. And anime actually gives you a great out in that you would assume anything drawn and animated is fake, and that you would have to get over that speed bump to start to believe that these are real tales of real people. Whereas we're playing a video game and everything they're showing to us visually is fake, and yet they're telling us a narrative that sounds like it might be based on reality or real. And arguably, maybe that's why most video game stories are over the top and ridiculous. But yeah, you have to be careful. There really is no such thing as making autobiographical games or biographical games. And there really shouldn't be autobiographical or biographical games, because having a player control aspects of someone else's story is not really appropriate. So if you were looking for reality, you should probably see it in probably books. I wouldn't even say movies and TVs are particularly good about doing biographies or autobiography as well. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. I suspect we might be done in the next episode, but it's not really leaving enough foundation, I think, here to give any kind of major twist or reveal. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.